Hi folks, it's me Michaela and welcome back to my channel. We are here for the first reading wrap up of 2025, talk about the first books I read this year and in January. Honestly, I kind of had a slow reading start to January. I don't know why. Maybe it was the cold, maybe it was the snow, maybe it was the extreme lack of sunlight that just had me not feeling in the mood to do anything. But yeah, I didn't read as much as I expected I would in January. It's not like I didn't read in January either. This is also the first reading wrap up and video I think that I am filming with the new bookcase setup. If you want to see the video where I update my library and put these shelves together and reorganize all of my books, I will link it for you so you can check it out. I will also have a bookshelf tour coming soon to kind of just do a little more of a deep dive of how I have my bookshelf set up. So, keep a little eye out for that coming. But today what we're going to be talking about is the books I read in January. So let's talk about the books I read in January. Grab my little iPad. I love that this chair turns. I just feel so fancy and dramatic. Let's talk about some general stats for the month of January in regards to my reading. I ended up reading a total of 4 books in the month of January. 3 of them were fantasy books. 1 of them was a romance. All 4 of these were physical books that I owned, and I had 3 books that were new to me and 1 that was a reread. I read a total of 1,541 pages in January, which gives an average page length of 385 pages a book, and I read about 50 pages a day. So like I said, it's not bad. I feel 50 pages a day in a month is actually very normal for me, but for whatever reason it felt like sometimes I just didn't want to pick up a book and read, which is not my usual norm. And I wouldn't necessarily call it a slump, because it was I wanted to read in terms of I wanted to consume the story of what I was reading. I just literally felt too tired to focus. So I'm just going to blame Canadian winter for that. But yeah, that's kind of how it was. I also had an average rating in January of 4.4. So it was a very good reading month in terms of enjoyment, and that's always great to have. So the first book that I read in January and in 2025 was Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. I was really excited for this book. I got this as a birthday gift from my sister and her husband, and I was super excited to read it. I started this on my plane ride back from the holidays, and I finished it very soon after because it's just a really good book. I had very high hopes for this book, and the book met those high hopes and expectations. I ended up giving this 5 stars. I always love when the first book I read in a year is 5 stars. It just makes you feel like it's going to be a good year. Really love this. It is kind of this high stakes fantasy, but you kind of always know everything's going to be okay because of the very lighthearted and comical tone of the writing in the book. I absolutely loved the voice and the narrative style of this, and I think it's just such a fun fantasy story to read. I love the idea of the girl going to save her prince instead of always it being the other way around, and I also really just like Tress as a character. I also really like the world building in this. Just because it was lighthearted and cozy fantasy does not mean Brandon Sanderson did not put the effort in to have magic systems and world building not be extensive as always. So really loved this book, adored it. So glad that I got it for my birthday and read it this year. I've been wanting to read this since 2024. I think I put this on my 24 books in 2024 list, and I didn't end up reading it until the beginning of this year. So I had it as a want to read almost since it released, but I just didn't get around to it until now. After reading Tress of the Emerald Sea, I read A False Start by Elsie Silver. This is the 4th and final book in her Gold Rush Ranch series. I wanted to finish reading Gold Rush Ranch because I had started reading... feel like I've explained this like so many times, but here I go again. I started reading Chestnut Springs, got to the third book, realized that the characters from Gold Rush Ranch are in Chestnut Springs, so I paused Chestnut Springs to start reading Gold Rush Ranch. Now that I'm finished Gold Rush Ranch, I'm going to go back to Chestnut Springs, start it over, reread the first 3 books, and then finish that series. Okay. I did really like this series as well. I ended up giving this final book 4.5 stars. I do think that Elsie Silver's writing in Chestnut Springs is better than in Gold Rush Ranch, but I mean, that's kind of to be expected. You would hope that an author would get better at writing the more books that they write. But I still really liked both of our characters. I really like Elsie Silver because I feel like she makes romance stories that feel very inclusive without feeling like scream in your face, this is inclusivity, I guess. I don't know if necessarily me as like the most bland average person to ever exist on this planet is like the person to voice their opinion on that, but that's how I feel personally. Like as a reader in this book, you have a character who has suffered from a brain injury, and you also have another character who is the victim of abuse. And I think because both of these characters are so much more than just those instances that have happened to them, it makes it feel much more realistic and not like they're here for the gimmick of their traumatic past. And I think sometimes romance novels fall into that, and it makes me feel icky when it feels like all this character has to say and to offer to a story is an extremely traumatic background, and how having an extremely traumatic background seems to be like their entire personality. And I just like fully believe that people are so much more than what has happened to them. And I think that doesn't mean that like what happens to them isn't important and doesn't impact their life going forward or anything like that, or might have an impact on their personality or like how they move about the world. But it's not like everything about you is not what happened to you. So I really like that Elsie Silver makes these like very in-depth characters, in my opinion. If you think otherwise, you're allowed to, but I feel like her characters feel really real, and I really love that about them. And I think this was just like a really nice story. I liked it. I think it could have been a tad shorter. This book was, I think, over 400 pages. And when romances start getting to 400 pages, it can be a little difficult. I think like 300 to 350 is like the perfect length for most, if not all, romance books, personally, because I feel romance books, unlike other genres, have like a known set of occurrences in the plot, and so you can only like stretch that so far before it starts feeling like too stretched and too thin, and like the plot isn't like beefy enough to like carry a book through that many pages. You get me? Do you get me? Anyway, I thought A False Start was very well done, and I am like also just like really happy to now be done a series. My series spreadsheet is even happier that I'm done a series that is a completed series. There's no more books coming out in this. Finish that. How nice. After reading A False Start, I went back to fantasy books. I really had like a fantasy January because I ended up doing a reread of The Cruel Prince. I don't know why, but I was just like, it was before work one day. I had finished reading A False Start the day before. I needed to pick a new book to bring with me to the office, and I was just like looking at my shelf, and I was just like, I should do a reread of The Cruel Prince. Truly, like, it just in the moment made the decision, so I did it. Which is like kind of funny because I feel like I've been talking a lot recently about not being in like a YA mood and not wanting to read YA, and of course The Cruel Prince is a young adult fantasy novel, but I guess maybe now that I'm kind of going away from how far deep in the deep end of romance I was in, I'm kind of like getting back to YA, because I feel in my reading that like YA and romance novels, they serve the same function for me in my reading, in that I use them as like quicker and more lighthearted, not necessarily meaning that the books are lighthearted, but I feel like just in general YA and romance are not as heavy as some, you know, general fiction, literary fiction, or adult fantasy books, or like mystery thrillers stuff sometimes can just be really heavy topics, even though mystery thrillers are fun. But I use YA and romance both as like these kind of like fun, quick palette cleanser reads. And I think in 2024 I was like throwing away with YA because I was reading so much romance, but I think it's like starting to balance out now. And so now I'm kind of getting back into both, because I think there is good YA. I just need to be in the mood for it. That was like a really long unnecessary tangent, but there you go. Little insight into this little noggin up here. So yeah, I did a reread of The Cruel Prince. I gave it 4 stars this time around. I can't remember if I gave it 4 stars the first time as well. I think like I in general liked it more this time. I think because I knew what I was getting into. The Cruel Prince kind of has like this plot that feels like no plot, just vibes, until you realize that like it is a plot. Like it's a deceptive plot and that you don't realize things are happening until they are happening. And I think this is also very much marketed as being like a romantasy, but it's not. This is a YA fantasy that has a slight romantic element. Like the romance is not the plot of this book, the fantasy is. And so I think the first time I read this, I was kind of just like expecting it to be different than what it was. So I enjoyed it a lot more this time, and I'm really excited to get into The Wicked King, which is the second book in the Folk of the Air trilogy. I actually bought it this month. It's currently on my shelf. I don't know if you probably can't see this. You definitely cannot see that shelf. Anyway, it's on the shelf, believe me. And so I'll probably try and get to The Wicked King in February, because the end of this book leaves you with quite the questions of what's going to happen next politically. Do you say the cull? Politically. Okay, well, whichever one of those pronunciations is correct, that's what I was talking about. I'm excited. Like, I love a nice reread when you need it. I love a reread of a book. And so I'm glad I got one in January. Like, I know it's like too soon to predict this because it's literally the beginning of 2025 still, but I really feel like 2025 is the year of rereads. Like, I feel like this is the year to just reread all of the books and enjoy books that you've already enjoyed, and like have new opinions and have new perspectives, and like just love the books you already have again, you know? As much as I also of course love reading new books, I do love rereads, and I think sometimes I avoid doing a reread because I'm so focused on wanting to be like on top of newer books and reading things that are new to me. But I buy books because I like to reread. So if I don't take the time to reread them, what am I buying books for other than to look pretty on a shelf? Here's to rereading more books in 2025. So then the last book that I read in January, which technically, oh no, my little picture fell down. Technically, I finished this on February 1st, but I am a person who believes if I read most of the book in the month, then it counts for that month. And this is my channel and I make the rules. So I read this in January because I read the majority of this book in January. And that was Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. This is the first book in Throne of Glass. Obviously, there's also a prequel, but I'm planning on reading the prequel after reading the second book because I believe that's the release, like the publishing order of it. So I'm going to read Throne of Glass, and then it's Crown of Midnight? ? And then it's The Assassin's Blade, the prequel, I think. That's what I'm going to do. I mean, does it really matter? Probably not. Yeah, like shocking. I read another YA fantasy in January, which is like kind of funny. In 2024, I was like, I'm not really feeling fantasy. I'm not really feeling YA. And then like 2025 hits and I just keep reading YA fantasy. But I ended up giving this 4 stars. I have to admit, I was hooked. I was hooked on it. It got me. I was kind of doubtful. Not gonna lie. I was a little doubtful because like everybody's like, oh, Throne of Glass is so good. It's the best one. Look, I like Sarah J. Maas, but I would not say like I'm this huge Sarah J. Maas fan. A lot of people are, and you're allowed to be, and I love that for you. I love that people have an author that they feel that strongly about and that they love that much. But like I'm not that. I'm that for like Frederick Bachman once I finally get around to reading all his books. But honestly, even Frederick Bachman, I'm not like a stan, because like surely I would have just binge read all of his books by now if I was like that. So I guess maybe I just like don't feel that strongly about any author. I don't know, but that's like really getting off topic. I had some doubts because I was like, all the people I see who say they love Throne of Glass are like people who just really like Sarah J. Maas in general. And so I was like, because I have ACOTAR. I have read ACOTAR. I enjoy ACOTAR. It is my popcorn, yummy bag of chips kind of reading. And you know, like I think before I've called it like my beloved trash, because like ACOTAR is not literature, but that doesn't mean that it's not fun and it's not entertaining and just like an easy read that I had a good time with. You know, like I can like books and appreciate books that aren't here to be like some high esteem commentary on anything all the time, right? Like not all books have to be good in like the highbrow good literature way kind of good. But I'm also fully aware that like when I read ACOTAR, it was when I had barely gotten back into reading. Like A Court of Thorns and Roses was like the second book I was reading after getting back into reading kind of thing. So like I didn't have a lot to compare it to at the time. And I also now when I reread it, which I haven't done in a while, but you know, I did reread it when I was reading A Court of Silver Flames. I reread all of the other books first. And like even upon rereading, I was like, this isn't as good to me now as I remember it being, but I still have like this sense of like nostalgia and appreciation for it, for, you know, that series getting me back into reading. All that to say, it made me mildly doubtful about Throne of Glass because I don't necessarily love everything Sarah J. Maas writes, but I have to say I'm hooked. Okay, I'm hooked. I also made a reading vlog about this, reading Throne of Glass for the first time. It will be coming to you next week. So keep a little eye out for that if you want to hear all of my thoughts on it. But again, it was much more fantasy than romance, which I was happy about. There's definitely a strong romantic element, but I still think like the fantasy plot is the main plot and the romance is secondary. It is a little like typical YA fantasy with a romance element, but I also like wasn't mad at that because it's like you can't be mad at like a YA fantasy book with a romance element being what you think the typical YA fantasy with a romance element is, you know? Like I feel like you can't get mad at a book for like being what it is. But I did find like the plot interesting, and I kind of feel like I want to read the next book like right now. You know? So I gave it 4 stars. Don't know if I mentioned that yet because I did really like it. There were some aspects of this that don't make sense. Mainly like this is a book where like the main plot of the first book is this like competition that she's in, and all of the people in the competition have like sponsors. And for whatever reason, look, after the first bit, I just like suspend my disbelief on this and just like live with the fact that this is happening. But I still don't understand why any of the sponsors are dedicated, committed, interested in, or even partaking in this, because like what are they gaining? They have no reason to be sponsoring people in this competition. Based off of what they told us, they don't have anything to gain other than just like bragging rights, I guess. And I don't understand why any of them would choose to do that. So there were like a few things kind of like that put me off of it. So I wouldn't give it like a 5-star. But I thought it was like a very strong book. And I think the further in I got, the more I was liking it and the more it hooked me for the rest of the series. That is how I ended up feeling in the end. So there we have my January wrap up, first monthly wrap up of 2025. How exciting. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to give it a like, give it a little thumbs up. If you happen to like me, consider subscribing. I'd be happy to have you. Do let me know down below, how many books did you read in January? What ones were your favorite? Did you have a 5-star read to begin the year like I did? Are you like a little superstitious about having a great read as your first read of the year? Any thoughts? Let me know. And with that, I hope you're having a wonderful day today, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.